Thank you for letting me take time and present this to you. The title of my research is Multiple Source Exposure and Critical Thinking Skills. And I'll go through and explain what we mean by that, but by multiple source exposure, I'm talking about a variety of sources, where the information comes from and how the information is being presented. And I'm going to explain to you how my research shows that there is a correlation or a connection between multiple sources and the development of critical thinking skills. In case you didn't know, my name is Emily Hubbard, and I am a graduate student at the University of Southern California. Fight on, go Trojans, okay? Now with USC, I have been doing their MAT program, Masters of Arts in Teaching, through the Rosier School of Education, and this is my last term. I will be graduating in December, so this is the culmination of my research. Okay. Now, some of you may not be familiar with the concept of action research. It varies a little bit from the typical thesis research that you may be familiar with. And what it is with action research, it is done by doers. In this sense, it means it's done by teachers rather than being done by strict researchers. And the benefit of that is that it can be implemented immediately. As you know, there's a big disconnect between when you read about some research being done and then bringing that into your own personal life. And the connection for action research is that research is addressed by those who need it. You recognize something in your own life, in your own classroom, in your own learning experience that needs help with, and you're able to take the initiative and to work on it there. It's the same steps as typical research. I've reviewed the literature related to multiple sources, related to critical thinking, and I've formed a hypothesis, which is that there is a correlation between multiple sources and between critical thinking. That the more you're exposed, the more you see information in a variety of ways, the better you're able to deal with that information. You develop stronger thinking skills. I've tested it out, which some of you have been a part of, you especially, and then I've implemented it in the classroom, and then I've been sharing it with different sources, and tonight I get to share it with you. So I did my research at Preston Junior High. I know we're all familiar with the school, and I was able to work with Melinda Harris. She's been my host teacher. All of this research was done last term. I started being in her room in January, and I stayed through. I actually worked the last day of school, so the whole year. I was with just her, but I did work with 5 different 8th grade American history classes, 3 of which I used as my guinea pigs. The other 2 were my control groups. So I was able to compare their experiences as I worked to implement my project. What is critical thinking? Okay, we talk about critical thinking a lot, especially this term with the implementation of Common Core. We're talking about thinking skills. How do we think and how do we evaluate it? For the purpose of this, I've identified critical thinking as analysis, synthesis, compare, contrast, solve, and evaluate. So the questions that I've given my students are related to doing those things. How are things different? Making a determination as to what is better or not, or analyzing something for a connection to something else. Okay, on the first day of my implementation, I gave the students a questionnaire, and I want you to think about this yourself. So the first question, what makes something true? Just think about it. Okay. Who writes history? Who decides what's important from the past? How can you know for certain what the world was like before you were born? And then the last question, when you want to know something, how do you find out? And then on the left-hand side, I have the average answers for my 8th graders. That means that over 75% answered along these lines. You know something's true if it's a fact. Think about that for a second. That makes no sense. Okay? How can it be a fact? If it's true, like, they're 2 connected ideas. There's no deep analysis in there. Who writes history? History teachers? Yes, we're very busy. We write it all down. Everything. We make it up, actually. Who decides what's important from the past? People. Yes, it is not decided by the animal kingdom. It's people. There's just not a lot of thought given to these, and they actually spent a lot of time working on these. My students were really, really good about doing what I asked for them, and this is the kind of work I would get back. How can you know what it's like? Listen to what someone tells you, and then the internet. Not a search engine or an encyclopedia or any kind of reliable source, just the internet. Okay? Which I've seen them do research on the internet, and yeah, they just type the question into the address bar. So there's also a need in there to teach multimedia literacy, but that's got to be someone else's project. These are different ways that we see information presented in the classroom. These are our multiple sources. It comes through lectures, video, images, audio, discussion. If you're lucky, you can do fun things like animation or visual previews. But usually in class, and you guys think about your class today, you were in school, you probably had one of these happen. Did anyone have more than one happen in a class? Lots of you. More than two? More than three? Oh, I'm so pleased with you guys. You don't even need my information. You're already doing it. Good. These are an example of the exit tickets I gave my students after my lessons to get an idea of what they thought. I know you filled out really good ones. I always asked for additional to text for images. It was hard to get any other media in the classroom, but on a note card I could draw me a picture of what they remembered and answer the questions. And the one thing I liked about the picture is it helped them make a determination or to evaluate what the key point of the lesson was without worrying about actual literacy, which is something that the students struggle with. My first implementation lesson, I had 3 control groups. Half the class was gone the first day, and so we watched a video presenting information about manifest destiny up to the Monroe Doctrine. The second day, the next half of the class was absent because it was field trips. So they participated in a discussion and then viewed multiple sources. I don't know if you can tell from the image, but there's a video clip, a map, a personal story, a primary source, and then a secondary source, and then had a discussion about those with the class. My third group was there for the whole thing, so they had both sources. So this was the hard data for my plan. It was running through these 3. And you can see here are the kinds of answers I got back. Of the kind that had just one source, 30% answered all of the questions. That means that 70% weren't able to answer everything, and only 25% could give me a complete sentence in their response. You can see the more they were exposed, the greater they were able to respond. My last group that had all 3 could answer 75% of the questions. That's every student answered at least 75% of the questions accurately. And 60% were able to give me complete sentences. And if you know middle schoolers, complete sentences are really rough. So 60% I was very, very pleased with. The key result being that the greater the exposure, the greater the student ability is displayed. The more they see information, especially in a variety of sources, the better answers they're able to give you. Because they're able to think critically, because they're seeing it in multiple venues. So it helps remove from the rut of just text or just lecture. The objective data, things that you could measure, is I did interviews with the teachers, during which I found out that they consult at least 4 sources per lesson. That was an average, 4 sources per lesson. But then my field notes and observations show that students only interact with 1. Again, that's an average. So obviously there's more in there, as we saw with our show of hands earlier. But what this shows us is that teachers see more sources than their students are seeing. So it's not hard to add more to your lessons. You're already looking at them. Just need to make the selection of what you're doing that you could carry on to them. You're looking at multiple things to develop your own thinking skills. Your critical thinking is in fact aided by viewing multiple things, so how can you help your students? By sharing more sources with them. So I'm not asking you to do anything you're not already doing, just to add to it a little bit. The big answer, utilize more sources, develop greater thinking skills. That's what all my research shows. The more sources you use, the better you can think about things. Obviously, my research has a few weaknesses, and I'm not going to lie and tell you it doesn't, so here they are. I can't control things like student attendance or engagement. I tried. You can't make them come to school, and you can't make them love what you're sharing. But as you work towards those things, it does help. So some of my students were absent, and that may have affected their scores because they weren't there for maybe the 3rd day. So I couldn't control that. Varied media versus repetition. This is an obvious flaw. Do you learn more because you see it more, or do you learn more because you see it in various ways? Is it mixing up the sources or just repeating? I haven't found a way to accurately measure that yet, so it's still a weakness. My last thing, measuring critical thinking skills. There's not a critical thinking scale. I can't accurately weigh your answer to see if it's better. I can just compare what I got before the implementation and after. And after I did see a big increase. Utilize more sources, develop greater thinking skills. Thank you so much for listening. I hope that as you go through your life, you're able to see opportunities to implement more and that it helps you.